I remember one time when I was in a planning commission, and this was sometime after we'd been here, some long period of time. And I was at the planning commission, and somebody had presented a plan before the planning commission, and it was a poor plan. It was not thought about much as far as the environment or anything, you know. Some little lady in the back room got up and says, "Why don't they have a landscape architect?" And I thought, I've arrived. I am Lyle Aten, and I'm 87 years old. I was born in Macomb, Illinois in 1927 and lived there for the first part of my life until I went into the service in the Navy. And I was 17 when I went into the Navy. Served there 2.5 years or 2 years, and saw the Pacific Theater and kind of chased the war around the Pacific, following up some battles but never being in one. And so I really got a kind of a free tour of the Pacific, all the way from China to the Philippines to all the islands of Midway and Saipan and so forth. So I had quite an experience just in my Navy career, which was fortunate and a real eye-opener for a 17-year-old boy. And you know, it just kind of, it just gave me a different perspective, I think, on life itself, seeing what I saw on that tour. And then when I got out of the Navy, I went to University of Western Illinois. And I was still kind of scouting around on something to do as far as a career is concerned and direction of education. My first inclination was to go as a PE instructor, as coach, because that seemed to be most of my interest was in athletics at that time. Well, there were about 6 or 7 guys that were just my same age and the same schools and so forth. They were all going to coaching. And that sort of dissipated my interest in it. And I started looking around, and I took some academic counseling tests. And I was a counselor at the university, at Western Illinois University. And so he tested me with the usual counseling procedures. So when I went to talk to him about it, and he looked at the data, he says, well, he says, there's some things here that comes up, but he said, I have no knowledge of it all, but it says you might be well suited for something in the environmental, natural design area, like, he says, landscape architecture. He says, I've never heard of landscape architecture. He says, I said, well, where do I find out anything about it? He said, well, the University of Illinois has a curriculum. Why don't you go over there and talk to them about it? So that's what I did. I went over there, talked to the professors over there, saw the work the students were doing, and talked to the professors and what they thought the profession was going. So next fall, I signed up for University of Illinois in landscape architecture. The more I got into it, the more I found that it was a very broad profession, had a lot of possibilities, especially in the design area, doing design of land development of all scale, whether it be residential, whether it be community, whether it be regional, whether it be statewide, or whether it be national-wide. And fortunately, I got into a firm when I graduated that was doing a lot of that kind of work. They were doing public housing, they were doing residential design, they were doing park design. So it fit right into what my background in education was. It was a good fit. So I was very fortunate in making the right step at the right time, whether circumstances contributed to it, just I don't know what degree. But that was kind of the beginning of the career. And then the more I got into the design and the curriculum, landscape architecture, the more I found it was broad. And it was largely involved in a design process. And that design process included a broad category or broad vision of things, you know, all the way from, like I say, from regional, statewide, community to finite design, site design. So that sort of general scope, wide scope, appealed to me. And it's appealed to me all the way through my career, is I've been able to work on residences like this, or I've been able to work on statewide projects that are environmentally based. And I may have several consultants that'll be involved with the team of designers that we'll be working with. So that was what really made the profession interesting to me, was the design challenges and the differences of scope in work. I was fortunate in coming into the practice early. There was only two or three landscape architects in Kentucky when I came down here. And as I say, I first got a job with a firm that had offices in Peoria, Illinois. And they were just a startup firm. And so they started getting some work down here, and they sent the new guy on the block down here. That was me. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the first projects that I worked with was in an architect's office, and they were doing the Bluegrass Depot. And what we did there was they needed somebody who had expertise in just doing grading and siting. So I sited the bunkers. Have you been down there? Mm. The bunkers are where they put the munitions, and they cover them up with dirt. Okay. So I did the layout, or part of the layout anyway. I was part of the team. And we created the location of all these bunkers in the circulation system, and then grade them with earth berms over each one. So I had to do the grading, earth grading, for all these bunker plans, and it was a large area, as you well know. So that was one of the first things I really got to put into practice, the things I'd learned in school on site grading and land layout. So that was a good beginner project for my getting out of school, because it was intensive work. And then I got to do the housing projects that was from that office. And this was the era when a lot of public housing was going on. And public housing had to have an architect, a landscape architect, an engineer. And so I got to be in the firm I was with, got to do the architecture, and they had me do the landscape design, site layout and grading and planting and so forth. So I do all the phases of that. So I got on a number of just these ordinary, I say ordinary, but they were fairly new and current at that time, new housing projects. So I got to do all the site work. It was good work for a graduate student, or a student just out of school, mm-hmm. to do grading work that he'd done in school, you know, and everything, academically, and then come out in real practice and have to do it, you know, and work out the site, do the site analysis, understand the soils, the rock, and the geology, and the topography, and then do site planning of putting all the buildings on the site, and then doing the grading for the site and putting in the roads and so forth. It was good training. I was fortunate in having that kind of challenge, that I put my scholastic training or work, scholastic studies, into actual work. There was a professor here in architecture, and he, I forget now, he went, I forget where he went to school. I think he went to school to University of Pennsylvania, that's what it was. And so he evidently had a wider scope of just art than just architecture. He came to our office and met with Mr. Scruggs and me, and he says, I need somebody to help in my curriculum, part-time. And Mr. Scruggs was too busy traveling and everything. He said, well, Lyle can do it for you. So I kind of got into teaching in architecture. Well, that lasted for about 2 or 3 years, and then they started to think about establishing a landscape architecture curriculum. Well, they called on me to write a curriculum, or at least consult with them on a curriculum. So I wrote up a curriculum, and then they got a chairman of the department, and the two of us went on and materialized a more significant curriculum that they took off with. So I helped in the inception of the architectural, or landscape architectural design department. And then so they put me on as part-time adjunct professor. And I was on that for quite a while, you know. And in that, my job was to teach 1 or 2 day afternoons a week in a design studio. So that's what I did, and so my role there was that would be a principal, and I would be teaching under him, but I could form my own direction under him. After we would work together, of course, but I could take an adjunct, an area that he might not be so familiar with, in my lectures or my board critiques or so forth. So we kind of complemented each other. I worked with the Planning Commission a long time on one side of the bar, presenting these same projects to the Planning Commission, because everything has to go through the Planning Commission for any kind of design. So I worked on that side of the bar for some time, representing clients, private clients. Well, after I retired, they asked if I wanted to be on the Planning Commission. So I got to be on the other side of the bar and review cases coming to me, you know, and other commission members. So in a lot of ways, you can be more objective when you're on the other side of the bar than you can when you're representing a client and he has defined interest, you know. Mm-hmm. So it was good to have that way. I got to play both sides of the field. And it was just, but sometimes I think probably I may have pontificated too much when I was on the Planning Commission in trying to express what I thought a designer should be doing that was proposing plans to us. Because at one time, the attorney for the Planning Commission came up to me, kind of behind me where I was sitting. He says, Mr. Aten, you can't say that to him. You can't say that at this point. Let them design it, you criticize it, but you can't redesign it. So I exceeded my boundaries occasionally. Well, when I first came on in the doing land planning, the ordinances of Lexington were pretty basic. So I thought there were several ordinances that tended to be more environmental ordinances and design ordinances. So I wrote several ordinances and worked with the Planning Commission in getting them approved. But they were not existent until I started introducing them. They dealt with design aspects. They designed with land use, or involved in design of land use, visual qualities of quarters, visual, different criteria. But let's see,
The boundaries?
And the boundaries, working out boundaries of neighborhoods and so forth, and we established a neighborhood concept boundary. And this town now is set up in a number of boundaries of neighborhoods. So you have a neighborhood, and you can focus in on that neighborhood and put the elements in within that neighborhood that is defined either by major streets, topographical features, or other elements, then so that you have a functional neighborhood rather than just being one big city that might have this and that so forth scattered around. So the neighborhood principle is something, of course it was something that I learned in school to begin. That was a philosophy and that was preached in school was neighborhoods and how neighborhoods evolved, what makes up a neighborhood, what elements have to be in neighborhoods, how many people does it take to, should you have, or residential areas for a park, and what guidelines for a shopping center, how many homes should be serving a type of shopping center, what type of shopping center, neighborhood shopping center, regional shopping center, community shopping center, whatever. The same goes for parks. How many, in working out a neighborhood plan, how much ground do you need to designate for a park? And what lands are most feasible for parks? What lands are most feasible for housing? What lands are feasible for more open space? You know, those are the kind of things that a landscape architect and land planner deals with when it comes to urban planning. When Lexington was growing, and it was urban and county, there were two segments of this, what we have now as Lexington. Part of it was in the city limits. Part of it was, the rest of it was in the county, the whole Fayette County. Lexington was just part of that. Very fortunate they made an urban county system, because what we were having, and we were involved in this early on and saw the need and worked with them into making this urban county together so that it worked as a unified government. What would happen was that inside the city there was a set of design guidelines and ordinances. The county didn't have those. So many developers would go to the county and they didn't have to have nearly the requirements of sewers, road systems. You know, they didn't have to have anything out there, or not anything, but as much as inside the boundary, because the city had these requirements and the county didn't. So until we got an urban county government system, did we get the urban county planning together. That was a big stroke in my history, because then we got a better planning department, a more comprehensive planning department. When I first came down here, they had one planner in the basement of the city building, and when I walked in the room and told him I was a landscape architect, he said, "Oh my gosh," he says, "welcome." Because it was at that time things were happening, you know, and he had a secretary and himself, and they were trying to do all the planning at that time. That was in the early 50s. And so he was glad to have me come. That's why we got so many jobs, I think, because he just said, well, there's a landscape architect who will take care of planning your property or your property if they came in, you know. And at that time there were some properties coming in and other areas that needed planning. And he just couldn't do it all himself. It wasn't his scope. It wasn't his task. So he was glad to have somebody else come in. Well, that's Ashland Lyle. We first did went to Ashland, Kentucky, on the main Ashland headquarters, and started working with them on that. And they had a building in place when we first came on that project, and they asked us to do a master plan for an additional acreage where they were having their main, another main building that they were putting up there. So we cited that. We did all the site elements, the parking area, the landscape work, and we did a park and a little pond and lake behind the building with a fountain and kind of an aesthetic employees environmental center. The water company had a lot of land out in this area, and so they came to us to do the land planning and subdivision design for that whole area, and it was, I don't remember how many acres, but it involved everything around the reservoir, if you can imagine how much that involved. So we did a land use plan for the whole site on all parts of the lake and so forth. So that's Lakeside was one of the divisions of that development. But we did the lake, the guidelines for the lake. The Lake Association utilized later on for their control and so forth, their management. And we did all the layout for the various residential areas. It's a combination of materials. It has a combination of housing accommodations, large family, single family, some medium-sized single family, some condominiums, and lakeside development. And we did as I say, the guidelines for all the development. This was a development that was to have private streets, a gatehouse, and it was in a development in a wooded section. So one of the requirements for the considerations was to place the road system and the house sites so that they would save the wooded area as much as possible, and it become part of the total environment within the subdivision. It was important to save as many trees as possible in the siting of the houses and the roads in order to make the quality of the development. That's why we call it the woods. Oh, this is the old Frankfort Pike roundabout. The highway department, in their wisdom, wanted to put a roundabout in the intersection of Viley Pike and old Frankfort Pike. And they had developed a design for it, and the horse farm owners surrounding it wanted to be a significant entry point to the horse farms between the city and the horse farms. So they hired me to develop a concept for an entry, emphasis of an entry. We did the design, and it was extensive. It involved some stone walls and much planting, and a statue in that hump of dirt you see there in that picture on the right. We had a statue and talked to the same sculptor that did the horses in the Thoroughbred Park. So she was going to work on a statue of a horse in that circle, inside the circle. And then we designed some planting and walls and so forth. And the highway had designed in that area you see between the retaining wall, the walls there, the batter boards, a sing strip. And we had designed that whole thing as being granite cobbles. Now the highway department put it in differently. They put in just they used concrete impressed into looked like more like cobbles, not real granite. They did not put in the mound and the statue or the planting in the median. They did not put any of the planting on the walls that were around the outside of the circle. And nor did they put in additional grading to increase the size of the landscape work around the outside of the circle. So it's something that was. Here's what happened. The horse farm owners came to me and wanted to do something here significant, like I say, as an entry to the horse farm area. So that's what I did. I made a significant entry element. And then when the highway department, the horse farm people went with me to the highway department. However, I think the person that we talked to was the project engineer here for the highway department. He had no really jurisdiction other than what he was doing on this project. Because we talked to him as like talking to a wall. Even with these 3 horse farm owners that was with me, that wanted to do it this way, and they said they would pay for it and everything. He said, no, he said, the project's been bid. He said, it's overbid, we got to do it again, but we got to do it cheaper. He was only working with his limitations, whatever he thought they might be. So that's the way it came out. Water is infectious with people. It attracts people. And so we like to work with the water in wherever we can. Of course, at Lakeview, we had water out there. It was just a matter of working around it. But with this Lexington Green, we created a lake and used that as kind of the focal point for a commercial area. And so in developing the concept, we started with the lake, and then we saw how buildings might be related around that lake for a commercial purpose. And so that everything had a primary relationship focused to that lake. And so that's how that evolved. And it was commercial. So on one side you have to have the parking area and so forth. But then on the other side you had the commercial, the park, or the park-like area with a lake and fountain and so forth. Then around still related to the lake, we had another land use there of some offices and apartments. So you got a multi-use in this area, and it's in an intersection, a major intersection of New Circle Road and Nicholasville Road. So it was a prime location. Well, Jacobson Park was a water company park. Water company had the lakes on both sides of Richmond Road. And the Jacobson was a portion of land that was on the north side, or northeast side of the road, Richmond Road. And I don't remember who the mayor was at that time, but they worked out a deal where they would let the city lease that for 40 years or 50 years and make a park out of it. So the city hired our firm to do a park on that side of the road and a golf course. So we designed a golf course and a park on that side of the road. And it was a multi-use park. It was a large acreage, and so there were a number of things that you could do. And of course, it had the lake, which is a really asset for any sort of environmental, recreational purpose. So we designed the golf course as one side of it, one side of the lake, and the roadway system, the park areas, and the clubhouse location, and all the amenities for a golf course. And then on the other side of the lake, on the east side, we designed a system of roadways that dealt with a number of functions within this park. And the topography is such that we could division that off into different areas and have its own identity. There was one portion where it could be Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, that sort of park and area of the park. So they could have their own area. There was an area where you would have access to the lake itself and have boats and paddle boats and canoes and a shelter there, and the parking areas and the circulation, and bridges to go across the small lagoons and so forth. Just a number of things that you could incorporate into that. And then, of course, large recreation areas where they have ball fields, excellent place for kite flying and so forth, because you had nice broad meadows and so forth. So we designated that. matter of trying to put the right thing in the right place, you know, and knitting it into the environment and the landscape. And that was our task, and that's what we look for. And so we have multiple uses and multiple purposes throughout that whole park, you know. With Paris Pike, I was not a design consultant. I was a consultant on the land use planning for the park corridor, so that it preserved the quality of the corridor for about I think it was 1,500 feet on either side of the corridor, and I wrote zoning ordinances and design controls for that whole corridor, so it would remain the same. So it has limitation on the size of any parcel that can be sold or built on. I think I started out with 90 acres, but they ended up with 45, I think, as a compromise. So you can build a house on a 45-acre tract out there, but nothing smaller. So what I wanted to do was preserve the openness of the quality. We worked with I don't know whether you know about it or not, but Paris Pike was a terrible pike for a while, terrible road. It had more deaths per mile than any one in the state, I think, for a while. It was dangerous. And so the State Highway Department for many years had been trying to do something with it. And they had different routes that they'd proposed on east of Lexington that would connect Paris with I-64 and various places. Well, those all went by the wayside, and for some reason or other, and so they wanted to put the pike, reinforce it right here, just to improve it. Mm-hmm. Well, the horse farm people did not want it that way, and so the highway, with unusual foresight and sensitivity, hired or took one of their chief engineers, the second in command, who set up a commission for this corridor. The committee and commission for this corridor hired a consultant. They hired design consultant. They hired land use consultant, which was what I was. They hired a mitigation group, because they knew there would be problems with cause as I say, they tried to put a route through here before, mm-hmm. and all the horse farm owners didn't want it messed up, because there's some major entities in that Paris Pike corridor that own farms. They would mitigate and arbitrate differences of opinion. So they came here they were from Seattle, I think. They met out into Horse Farm Park, or Horse Park. They met different places, and they met with the landowners, and they got through their own sort of system. They got a consensus of what they liked, that horse farm people liked, didn't like, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And then they worked with the designers on the horse farm, on the alignment through the horse farm area. And they had a stone wall consortium that was developed, so that they'd replace some of the stone walls that would be lost. So with all these groups of involved consultants, and then breaking up the ownership into about 5 different categories, meeting with them, getting this consensus in each separate one, you know, they mitigated then the problems that they were having when they first proposed this highway. It was a unique thing for the state to do. Mm-hmm. They never had gone, as far as I know, they had never gone through that sort of deliberation process. Anyway, it worked. So we got to be a consultant on the land use and the control of the corridor all the way along. And this firm from Seattle was a mitigating firm and the design firm. So we worked with this as a team in that thing. So it was one of the more satisfying things that I think I've ever worked through. It was so up in the air for so long, you know, involved emotionally for all these people that it really worked out. And you have to hand to the state to get somebody, a chief engineer, sit in all these different deliberations and get the right qualified people in the right position to get it done. And it's done. And it is a prime road in this nation. There are not many roads like that in this nation that have that quality. To deal with historic, the environmental, and the physical that does. So I'm very proud to be a part of that team. When you're a designer and you do these things, you're doing it in sort of an abstract basis. You're doing it on the physical environment, and you're trying to think of what people desire and so forth, and things they'd like to do, and the varieties and differences. And then when you put that on a plan, you think you got it all together, and then 25 years or 30 years later, you come back and you see it happening. That's a fulfillment. You know, that makes what you worked on and everything vindicated, and you're happy about it. It's just nice to see.